So today we're going to examine the public opinion on NSA surveillance techniques with regards to data collection on both terrorists and United States citizens. The first headline that we're looking at states that a majority of Americans, 56%, say that the NSA's program tracking the telephone records of millions of Americans is an acceptable way for the government to investigate terrorism. However, the second headline states that a majority of Americans, 54%, oppose the government collecting bulk data on its citizens. Let's go to Nick as he discusses the first problem with the two.
They only selected 1,004 adults from the entire continental United States. Now, picking a sample this small from such a large and diverse country does not give you an accurate statistic at all. Even if you were to pick a sample of this size from a large city, you still wouldn't be able to get an accurate statistic. Now, United States is a very large and diverse country, so you would need to select a very large sample if you want to survey an entire country like this. Now for headline 2, the sample they took is much larger and provides a much more accurate statistic. They selected 10,013 adults from all 50 states and including Washington, D.C. Now, with a much larger sample like this and from more parts of America, they're able to get a more statistically significant result, meaning this was more likely that this survey would find the results that the researchers were looking for. Now, having such a better sample, more people, this gives a better sense of the feelings of the population compared to the first headline, which only 1,000.
Has to say about the next problem.
The time frame for this survey was June 6th to June 9th, 2013. This would be considered a convenient time frame for two reasons. The first reason is this survey was started the day after the first documents were released by The Guardian that detailed the NSA's surveillance activities. At this time, there was still a lot of confusion about what the documents said and the extent to which the NSA was surveilling the American people. The researchers capitalized on the confusion at the time to get a result that fit what they were looking for. The second reason is that the very short time frame used to conduct this survey is a convenient time frame. The survey took place for 3 days, and this did not give the American people enough time to read through the thousands of classified documents that had been released to make an assessment of what was really going on. If the time period of the study were to change to include more time than 3 days after the release of the documents, then the results may have changed. Okay. The time frame for this survey was January 23rd to March 16th, 2014. This was several months after Edward Snowden's release of classified documents detailing the NSA's surveillance activities on the American people. By this time, the public had had its time to look through the documents and formulate an opinion. During this time period, both the journalists from The Guardian that wrote the article released and Snowden had received awards. These awards praised the actions of these individuals without a doubt influencing the public opinion at the time of the survey. If the time period of the article would have changed to when Snowden and the journalists were not so highly praised by the media, then the outcome of the survey may have been different.
Dylan is going to talk to us about our
The problem with our first survey was that it was weighted for a number of population parameters that take into account demographic factors that may not have been represented in the study. These demographic factors include gender, age, race, education, and population density of a region, among others. While not truly capturing these differing demographics within the study's results, and rather artificially accounting for them is perhaps more efficient than finding people to match these characteristics, it can skew the results. The technique the researchers applied to account for these things may not actually show how people from these groups view the NSA's data collection techniques. Since these groups were not truly measured, but rather artificially accounted for, this results in a misleading sample that does not show the true feelings of the United States as a whole. This survey did do a better job than the second survey, which we'll see shortly, in terms of attempting to represent the population as a whole, because this survey was conducted in both English and Spanish. Doing this study in both languages allowed the researchers to examine the opinions of a more diverse group of people. The survey also collected data from the continental United States, so it didn't capture the opinions of other people in other areas of the country. For these reasons, this study produced a misleading sample that did not truly represent the opinions of the United States as a whole. The researchers conducting our second survey also utilized a variety of statistical techniques to account for demographic factors in their study. In this regard, they suffer from the same issue that the researchers in the first study also did. Artificially accounting for demographic differences does not truly show the opinions from these groups. This could have been avoided if the researchers accounted for these groups while conducting their survey, making the results applicable to be more accurately applied to the population as a whole. With a much larger sample size in this study, more than 10,000 adults compared to the first study's 1,000 adults, these researchers should have been more easily able to account for demographic differences in their study. With more people in the sample size, they should have examined more people with differing demographics. This study was different from the first study in that it was only conducted in English. This factor produces a misleading sample because it only accounts for people who are English speakers, not allowing for people who speak other languages to have their opinions also accounted for. This survey was conducted throughout all 50 of the U.S. states as well as Washington, D.C., so in terms of geography, this study did a better job than the first study of examining the opinions of people across the United States.
Daniel's back to talk to us about our fourth problem.
For Concept 4, we looked at raising the bar. The statistic for this survey looked at those Americans that were okay with their phone conversations being surveyed by the federal government. This statistics did not question about internet activity being monitored by the government. A majority of Americans, 56%, say the NSA program tracking the telephone records of millions of Americans is an acceptable way for the government to investigate terrorism. This statistic looked at Americans and their view of the government surveying their internet and phone usage. This added in the possibility of the government looking into their internet usage on top of their phone usage. By adding in another communication method that could be surveyed, this raised the bar. This change in interpretations could have been made to look like the view on surveillance was becoming more negative because the definition expanded to include more cases. Americans might be more willing for the government to oversee their phone conversations over the government monitoring their internet usage, so we can't infer anything about the change in the behavior unless we ask just about surveillance on phone conversations. A majority of Americans, 54%, disapprove of the U.S. government's collection of telephone and internet data as part of anti-terrorism efforts.
Dylan is going to talk to us about our fifth and final problem.
In terms of broad definitions, this survey analyzes the percentage of U.S. adults who have changed their technology habits either a great deal or somewhat. These definitional categories can change from person to person, as everyone can view a great deal or somewhat differently. The survey did not detail any ways they possibly tried to make these definitions uniform across the study. The second survey asked participants whether they approved or disapproved of the government's collection of phone and internet data. Approved and disapproved can be broadly applied to this particular question. The researchers never gave set guidelines for participants to use regarding whether or not they agreed with the question. The researchers should have clearly established what approving and disapproving were. Approving to one person could have meant that they felt the techniques were necessary to prevent terrorist attacks while being immoral, while another person may have felt that the attacks were necessary and moral. The researchers could have made it more clear whether each of these people approved or disapproved, since their feelings were actually different.